We'll go through the lessons that we think are important and that are reflected in this memo, and then we'll turn to Jordan, and then lots of time for conversation. So what we did in this memo and through our reflections was try and break down what it is to build a relationship with particular funders and funding communities, again, who orient towards social change or policy change. And these are the 4 steps which you'll see reflected in the memo. Scanning the landscape, identifying overlap in agendas of change and research, making your own contribution legible to that funding community, and then sticking the landing, which is code for like building a relationship which actually makes a difference on both sides. The punchline, one of the punchlines, and we'll close with punchlines 2, of course. One of the punchlines is that you're not going to be seen by this funding community unless they can discern your relevance. One of the things that we need to do in thinking about working with funding communities that are interested in social change is to indicate that the type of work that we would like funded, that we would like to do with external money, is relevant to the agendas of this particular funder or funding community. And so when the funders, the program officers, the boards, the folks who are channeling the money on the foundation sides are thinking about what they're looking to do in directing money, what they tend to have in mind is a set of metrics that reflect a set of changes that they would like to see in the world, through a theory of change. And what we need to do is take our academic work, which we would like funded, and say, you need this, because with what we bring you, your agenda will be advanced, right? That's the work that we need to do. And what Jonathan and I will kind of speak to is just kind of how to do that in a practical and pragmatic way. What it starts with is a lot of research on our side, right? If we are funded, if we are academics, researchers, looking to get work funded from this community, we have to do a whole bunch of applied research of our own to work out what this community is and what it needs. I should reveal that Notebook LM helped us with this presentation. This is Jonathan and my first attempt at using a tool which our students tell us we need to understand. And it was Notebook LM's insight to say, think like Sherlock Holmes, not something that I would have put on a slide, but that in essence is what we're asking you to do. Be like a researcher who is looking for the match between the researcher's agenda and what you bring. And well, I don't need to linger on that, but what that means in kind of real terms is that we have to look for funders and make ourselves legible to these communities, not through finding a perfect match between what we want to work on and the call for proposals that magically appears in the world that is just for us. Right? We're not looking for, with these particular communities, the National Science Foundation or some foundations will do this. They'll send out a broad call in the scientific area that is of interest to us, and we can craft our typical academic proposal in response to that call. Instead, what we're looking for is some alignment between the things that we are interested in and the expression of needed change from that foundation, and then having to do the translational steps between the work that we want to do and the work that the foundation expresses that it needs. And in some basic terms, this breaks down into a different orientation to what it means to be a researcher in relation to this body of funders. So instead of targeting academic journals, we're having to kind of filter the interest that we have through real-world problems and the opportunities for practitioner learning. When we're looking at the program areas that are being funded out of these different funding communities, we're not necessarily looking just for research programs, and this is an important thing that you'll see reflected in the memo. We're looking for programming areas, we're looking for areas of practice and training, funder learning and learning within the communities that these funders are typically working with, that align with the interests that we have. And instead of contributing just to scholarly debates, what we have to do in talking to these funding communities is talk about how we're informing the strategies for action. What I'll do now is just kind of reflect on a couple of examples, Jonathan, and then I've got one or two more slides and then turn to you if that's okay. So to make this a little more real, so again, I work with a group here in School of International Service called the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal, which grew out of an earlier effort called the Forum for Climate Engineering Assessment. What my group does is it works in a very niche area of climate response. There are a set of emergent technologies and practices that are about pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and putting that carbon dioxide into long-term storage or into productive use. And if these types of technologies are going to be climate relevant, then they're going to have massive political and social implications. By some measures, to be climate relevant, to actually do what climate models suggest is needed by these types of technologies, this will be the largest industry by material flow on the planet by the end of the century. It would be a massive, massive industrial undertaking to build a set of machines and social practices and so forth that do what the climate models suggest is needed for removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so what my group does is it takes that insight and it says we've got to build this industry in a way that's responsible, the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal, recognizing that this type of approach is needed, but not all forms of carbon removal are created equal. What are the social, political, ethical implications of particular types of carbon removal? Right? And that's an interesting and rich research vein. There are lots of different things that my group does that are traditional forms of academic research in that arena of social, ethical, legal, other questions related to this emergent carbon removal industry. But typical academic funders aren't really interested in speculative climate response when the world's on fire in so many other ways, right? And so what we've needed to do is to find a set of science and environmental funders who kind of get the need for getting out ahead of this type of technology. And so we need to look like a nimble NGO rather than a typical academic research shop. Yeah? And so what my group has done is stand up a whole bunch of different policy and social education programs. We run webinar series, we do all kinds of things that answer particular questions that we know are out there in the world and that connect the various pieces of the ecosystem through our academic credibility into the social change agenda of some of the funders that we work with. Right? We're visible all the time through LinkedIn groups, through the webinars, through a couple of podcast series that we run, just to make sure that folks are kind of seeing the value in a group like ours. Right? And in addition, it's important work. We feel like it's important to kind of do this educational and translational work. We run a fellows program each summer for environmental justice people from the front lines who are going to be impacted by these sorts of programs, these carbon removal programs, because the funding community recognizes the need to have leaders with particular perspectives and voices in the policy formulation and social consideration of this emergent area, right? And we run a whole bunch of different kind of programs that have that type of flavor. What we're able to do then is use our research insights to inform those programs, and in turn we're able to generate money through those programs that buys out time and staffing that supports traditional academic research. Right? The final program that I'll talk about briefly, we have a Sloan-funded project right now, which is about community engagement and community assessment of emergent carbon removal approaches, mainly marine carbon removal, so coastal things. What we pitched to Sloan was, we know that this is going to be really important and communities need to be engaged. We can trial a particular approach to community engagement that is of academic interest and can be very academically rigorous, that can provide insights for the way that lots of people approach industrial build-out and emergent technological examination. And we're doing something that's important for this particular set of technologies at this particular moment, right? It's a 2-for-1. We get the academic work, and we get the direct community engagement, which is going to benefit the communities that we're working with, in this case, largely in the Pacific Northwest. Right? Thinking not just in terms of the academic articles, but in terms of what the funding community requires of us. And this is the last slide for me, Jonathan, then I'll turn to you if that's okay. And so again, just to finalize this point on how we act like Sherlock Holmes and look for this overlap in research agendas. Largely, it's about following the money. Where are the funders and the funding communities that you're looking to work with actually investing their dollars? So we can look upstream. Which researchers are the agenda setters for practitioners in your field? Where is the money flowing into that agenda setting work? And we can also look downstream through reviewing outputs from applied research, identifying which scholarly work is taken up by practice-related programs. If you know the authors of that work which is being funded by particular foundations, call them, right? And work out how their relationships have been built, what they see as the needs in the field, how your research agenda might align with the needs identified by those colleagues. Okay, that's enough from me. Jonathan, are you happy to introduce yourself and your work a little bit before diving in?
Sure. Thanks, Simon. So I'm Jonathan Fox. I direct the Accountability Research Center here at SIS, and we've been doing this for about 10 years. And we are an action research incubator, and we work with public interest groups and social organizations, grassroots movements, and their allies in governments and international organizations where they have any, primarily in the Global South, in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And we have a specific niche, which is to focus on learning from and with change makers. In other words, there are so many terrible things that happen when because of failures of accountability. Many other organizations address that. We are kind of brand, if you will, is that we focus on learning from the strategies to address governance failures and how to promote accountability within public and private sector institutions. So we're funded by private foundations, and I should say a lot of these thoughts are particularly focused on private foundations. We could have a whole other conversation about government money, which we have actually stayed away from for a whole series of reasons before the recent change in government here. And we're funded by programmatic areas more than research areas within these foundations. So these are program areas within foundations that are focused on health, on education, on peace building, on human rights, on reforming the multilateral development banks. And these programmatic portfolios that are held by program officers have room for applied research, but it has to be relevant to the rest of their portfolio, to the rest of their theory of change. One of the dark arts here is that many of these portfolios are not, they don't have open calls. Getting funded is by invitation. This is not obvious how to get a foot in the door. And so that's really the subtext for a lot of what we're talking about. We're talking about how to be, and here I was thinking about the comments from our commencement speaker on Saturday, Samantha Power, the former administrator of the former USAID, who talked about how rewarding it can be to feel useful as our graduates face with great queasiness the world that awaits. And I would just add that for this line of work, it's not just about being useful, it's about being perceived as useful. And by being perceived as useful by those who actually have resources to invest. Next slide, please. So the key thing for a scholar coming at this is how to find the zones of overlap between what we're interested in and what the change makers are interested in, and with the zones of overlap with those who, here in the case of private foundations, who have the resources to invest in supporting that kind of change. So it does not necessarily mean, doesn't mean dropping what you're doing and jumping into the work of a consultant, but it does mean letting go of the parts of our portfolio, at least while writing the proposal, that could be considered, and these are the two words that are the kiss of death, merely academic. Okay, these two words are widely used around the world, and when we, as professors, come into a room, we have to assume that we will be perceived, unless proven otherwise, that our agendas are merely academic. So this is a humbling experience that we need to take preemptive steps to address. So what does it mean to identify the zone of overlap? It involves the detective work, and I think Sherlock Holmes is in our memo, by the way, and And I watch too many detective shows. And so it involves really this connecting the dots, and I'll come back to this cliche, between our research agendas, our skills, what do we bring uniquely to our field of study, to the problem solving and possibly even transformational agendas that the program officers are coming into this with. So next slide, please. So one of the key steps in this process of being perceived as useful is moving from telling mode, this is what the research says, and therefore that's what you should do, to listening mode. Where are our counterparts coming from? And I should say one of the things that we do in our research center that enables this is not only support and participate in lots of practitioner learning, but most of our team members are actively embedded in their respective communities of practice of change makers. And so that adds to the standing that they bring to the their practitioner counterparts. So, and part of this involves acknowledging that the practitioners who are doing the work, if you will, are often themselves analysts, and therefore we have a lot to learn from them. They may not have the fancy methodologies that we bring to the table, but having a strong methodology and strong analytical skills are not the same thing. We could have plenty of brilliant methodologists who have very naive analysis of how the world works, and we can have some brilliant practitioners who have very sophisticated analysis of how the world works, but they're not going to be able to pull together the evidence in a way to get it through the review process of a scholarly journal. So this learning from practitioners, I can't overstate this enough, because it is not only crucial substantively for identifying the zones of overlap, it's also crucial for earning standing in the eyes of the practitioners who are also gatekeepers for the funding. And in fact, we could even go in with them together in funding proposals, if and when our work is perceived as useful to them. It's very different for an academic to say, my work is useful to this community of practice because A, B, C, and D. And it's another thing for key sort of flagship organizations or thought leaders in that field to actually be willing to partner with us in those proposals, and therefore add a huge amount of credibility to those proposals in the eyes of the funders who have a whole program dedicated to addressing a particular problem. And then another key point here is, how do we think ahead as opposed to sort of fighting the last battle, if you will, in our respective fields? How do we stay on the cutting edge by thinking ahead to what kinds of agendas will be crucial in the near to medium term? Next slide, please. So this very much involves legibility, and what is it about our work is going to be legible. If a program officer is going to search for us after meeting us over coffee at downtown at a think tank event where we followed the basic repertoire of finding the funder in the room and chatting them up, and they're going to look for us online, what are they going to see? Will it be legible to them? Will they see that profile as relevant to what they're doing, and why? So next slide, please. So this involves being very proactive. If we connect the search for zones of overlap to lift up the legibility of our distinctive contributions, we get to the question of how do we put ourselves in the shoes of the practitioner funder to be able to imagine and communicate how our research can contribute to their mission. So next slide, please. So if we go back to the detective work, this also involves a kind of institutional ethnography, if you will, and Thurkis in the other room, our expert ethnographer with the Public Accountability Lab in the anthropology department. But this means basically, what does this method involve? It involves thinking about how does one put oneself in the shoes of the other. In other words, the anthropologists don't have a total monopoly on ethnography as a method, and it really involves thinking about, well, how does the world look from where the program officer sits? And how do we figure that out? In addition to following them online and looking at whatever they've written and where they've come from. Were they an academic before they became a program officer? What was their field? What did they publish? And then the crucial thing is, what have they funded in the past? And many foundations have publicly accessible databases that shows what have they funded. And that does really help predict what are they going to fund in the future. Not necessarily the specific groups or problems, but the kinds of organizations they're looking for, the ways of thinking about the problems that they're asking, and especially the discourse that they are using to frame the way they see the world. So, and that's all background to the diplomatic challenge of what are you going to say if you get an introduction, if you find them in a meeting and are able to open up a conversation, where the goal should be to learn from them and think about where are they coming from, to then go back and continue to imagine, because it's not obvious, how to frame one's agenda in ways that are going to resonate with their mission. And how are we going to imagine what they would say to their boss when trying to pitch the idea of funding you? So this all boils down to putting yourself in their shoes. Next slide, please. So if we think about in the medium term, going from work as a classic individual scholar to building a broader program of research, and we're going to get this. We have this. This is another version of the earlier slide. We identify the overlap, or rather, we make our work legible. We identify the overlap. We scan the field, and it's. I can't overstate the importance of learning from and with the practitioners in order to establish credibility and standing. And this practitioner learning is in itself fundable. In this room, there are many, many meetings of practitioners convened by faculty that are not only substantively relevant for their respective agendas, it demonstrates the faculty members' convening power. And if there were a funder in the room, or if a funder sees the report on the meeting, that is evidence in the eyes of the funder that the faculty member contributes to agenda setting. A faculty member contributes to helping bring people together across silos. A faculty member helps contribute to helping to see how the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts. And so the practitioner learning has that somewhat instrumental relevance, but it also can be a form of research itself. What are key informant interviews? What are focus groups? That all happens in the context of an engagement, a structured conversation between researchers and practitioners like the ones that happen often in this room. And so one can seek funding, perhaps together with organizations out there in the world, seek funding for the practitioner learning, and research can very easily spin off from that. And that relates to the next point in the next slide, which is about the enterprise building, I think. And going beyond the individual standalone project. And the first thing that one might think looking at this is, what a headache. All of the bureaucratic obstacles, all of the problems that many of us know. If you are able to raise money, the challenge is to actually spend it, the organizational tasks, the many things that can go wrong organizing an event, the diplomatic challenges, why bother? And the short answer for me is that you can use the funding to free your time up. I can't overstate the centrality of course releases to being able to do this. And we are at a university that is, compared to other universities, extraordinarily flexible about granting course releases, unless you have a particularly unusual department chair, I don't know. But in general, there are other universities that have stricter rules and caps on how many courses can you buy out, and we don't have that. So if you are blocked in your effort to do that, that is the discretionary use of the authority of your immediate superior, not an institution-wide rule. So, it's basically impossible to make this transition from, an important article to a year to a more ambitious agenda-setting project that has scale, that shapes your field. And the way funders think and the way practitioners think, it's very hard to do that without freeing up your own time. And so that's the short answer to the why bother question. So, last slide. So just to sum up, it goes back to practitioner relevance, both substantive and perceived. And this creates the opportunity to go beyond sort of a what-if scenario to actively and tangibly shape agendas in our field. And if all goes well, 3 to 5 years from now, the funders are calling you and asking for your advice on what they should be doing. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jordan.
Hello, is it on? No. Yeah. Hi. So the memo by Simon and Jonathan, I think, is really great, and it resonates a lot with me in terms of my own experience working with applied funding. And so some of what I'm going to say is going to really just be kind of reiterating and reinforcing points that they've made, but also illustrating some of them with examples from my own work. I'll start by just highlighting the parts of their memo and presentation that I think are just really spot on and I think really, really important to underscore. First, the importance of looking for practitioner-oriented funders who support this kind of work, and understanding that funders are not all alike, but there are many that are interested in this type of applied research, and understanding the particular real-world goals, missions, theories of change of these funders, and then thinking about how you can frame your own research, your own work, as relevant to their concerns, as helping to advance their concerns, and really prioritizing relationship building with program officers as part of that. It's often hard to fully know what the agendas, goals, theories of change of a foundation are without actually talking to people. You may get a lot of good information pointing in certain directions from understanding who they funded before, but the direct conversations are just tremendously valuable. And then last point that I think is worth underscoring is the real value of fostering convenings or conversations that involve dialogue between scholars and practitioners. And on terminology Jonathan mentioned, the word academic can sometimes be a little off-putting to folks who are not academics. A word like scholar tends to be a little more friendly, I think, to folks who are not coming from academic institutions. Scholar doesn't, I think, sort of put someone so much in the ivory tower as the word academic tends to suggest. So we tend to use the word scholar and talk about scholar-practitioner dialogue. My own work, I'm a faculty member here in SIS. My research area is U.S. foreign policy. I study the politics and process of U.S. foreign policy. But the work I've done most extensively involving applied research funding is really extending beyond my own research area. And that's also one thing I wanted to underscore, is that some of the work that scholars can do in this space can kind of broaden beyond your own, what you might think of as your own kind of primary research area, particularly if you get involved in work that involves kind of broader convenings or training or initiatives that are sort of fostering interaction between scholars and practitioners in a broad sense. And I'll explain some of the work I've done in that direction. Just kind of briefly on how I've used applied funding. I've used applied funding in a few different ways. I'll just kind of briefly mention these, and then I'll focus in on one particular stream of work that I've done over a period of years. But to give a few kind of examples of the range of kinds of work that I would kind of broadly place in the category of applied funding. A number of years ago, I got a grant from a small foundation called the IBM Center for the Business of Government to fund an applied policy report on how government can do strategic planning effectively in the area of foreign policy and national security, because I had done some research on government strategic planning and national security. And one of the great staff in the research office here at SIS. This was before our current team in the research office had been familiar that I had done that research and had seen that there was this grant opportunity with IBM Center for the Business of Government, which I'd never heard of. And it was very niche, but it was just a perfect fit. So I got this grant and I did a kind of policy brief for them. So that's one example. I got a fellowship from a professional association, the American Political Science Association, to do a stint working in Congress. Now, this is really removed from research because in that role I was not doing research at all. I was working in a congressional office, but it was very generative of future research because largely based on that research, I did a lot of subsequent writing, publications about the role of Congress in foreign policy, and so I placed that in the category of applied research because it was a fellowship in a policy institution that informed my own future research agenda. The work I've done most extensively in this space is through a leadership role I have with Bridging the Gap, which is a organization based here and also at the University of Denver with scholars at a variety of other institutions, and I've been part of their leadership team for the last 12 years. And we have a mission of connecting university-based scholars and policy communities and public audiences on international affairs topics. And so this work is really extending beyond my own personal research agenda. So I have a particular research agenda on U.S. foreign policy, but this work is sort of fostering scholar practitioner exchange in the field of international studies more broadly. And we run some professional development programs for faculty and PhD students each year that are designed to give people skills for making their work relevant to people outside of academia, policy practitioners, as well as public audiences. And we convene workshops where we bring together scholars and practitioners. We use the term practitioners broadly to really refer to anybody who's outside of academia who is whose professional responsibilities concern the kinds of issues we're talking about. So this could be government people, it could be people at international institutions, think tanks, the private sector, nonprofits, civil society, all of that is how we think of practitioners. I think that aligns with how Simon and Jonathan would think of practitioners. These convenings, these workshops have also resulted in publication. So we have a model for these workshops where we have scholars present short memos with drawing on their research on specific international affairs topics of policy concern. They're given a policy relevant question and then asked to draw on their expertise as scholars to answer a policy relevant question in a memo and then present that in a convening with practitioners. The practitioners ask questions and engage in dialogue, and it's a conversation between scholars and practitioners, but the conversations are, the jumping off point is memos that are based on the research expertise of the scholars. In writing these memos, though, we have to sometimes guide the scholars to sometimes move a little bit away from what they might think of as their narrow research agenda, because we're trying to get them to answer a question that's of policy concern to scholars, not the question that they answered in their last article. And so that's important to sort of make the content as useful as possible for the practitioners who are in the room. Now, in terms of funders for this work, for the overall work I've done with Bridging the Gap, there have been 2 long-term funders, and this has been tremendously valuable to have a sort of sustained, ongoing long-term funders because it allows the work to us to do long-term planning, to have staff that have been sustainable over time, and so we've been very fortunate to have this. One of these funders is the Carnegie Corporation of New York, who's funded Bridging the Gap for almost 20 years, and is finally now closing out our funding after we've had many renewals over the years. Our program officer there, who is a tremendously supportive person of our program, he's left. There's a change in the leadership of the foundation, and so they're not going to continue funding Bridging the Gap. But he got us a 2-year closeout grant, which was very helpful through next year. And through him, we also ended up developing a long-term relationship with another funder, the Raymond Frankel Foundation, probably not a name that would be familiar to many folks in the room. Wasn't familiar to me before we got connected with this funder, but our program officer at the Carnegie Corporation, a man named Stephen Del Rosso, who we've worked with very closely over the years, met the program officer of the Raymond Frankel Foundation, a man named Alan Meyer. Alan had reached out to Steve because he was new in a program officer role at this family foundation that was kind of starting to build out its own funding. It's a relatively new foundation, and build out its grant program. And he went to Steve Del Rosso and he said, do you guys know any groups that might be worth funding in this space? And he said, well, you should talk to the Bridging the Gap people. So this introduction led us to then meet a program officer at the Raymond Frankel Foundation who we had a conversation with and talked about sort of our mutual interests. And that was 9 years ago, and we've now had a series of grants with this Raymond Frankel Foundation. Now, what I want to underscore, what's interesting, I think, for the conversation here about thinking about how to kind of frame and orient your work around the needs of practitioners or goals of practitioners and funders. So our program officer at the Raymond Frankel Foundation, Alan Meyer, has specific ideas about what change he's looking to see and how change can happen most effectively. He's interested in influencing U.S. foreign policy. Well, that's great because I'm interested in that, and a lot of the folks on our team are interested in that. He also feels strongly that in-person interactions are the most effective way for knowledge to be conveyed and to influence practitioners. So his theory of change is that the way that practitioners get influenced or get new ideas that may influence their action is by talking to other people who share ideas with them. It's not by reading things, because they probably won't read them. And so you need to get the people in the room. So when we first met with Alan Meyer, we had some ideas that we kind of pitched him. Some of them were more research writing oriented, like publishing policy briefs and the like. He was less interested in that. He was very excited about an idea we pitched of these workshops that I mentioned, of convening scholars and practitioners to share ideas on particular international affairs topics. And so we went with that, because that's what he was interested. We had to discard the rest of it. These workshops have turned out to be really successful. And so, he actually pointed us in a direction that's turned out to be a good direction for us to move in. He had actually, good insight. The practitioners who participated in these workshops have found them valuable. We've gotten very good feedback, evaluations, we do after the workshops. People have found them useful. And this started out as a small relationship. Our first grant with the Frankel Foundation 9 years ago was a one-year grant for $100,000. It was a kind of a test run. We did two workshops our first year, see how they went. And then we've gotten sort of larger over time. Our current, most recent renewal is for over $1 million for 3 years. So it's, as we've sort of shown that we can do this work effectively, the foundation has invested in us more, and we're now their largest grant recipient. We include him, so the program officer, Alan, in our programs. We invite him to all of them. He comes to many of them, although he lives in California. He'll fly here. This is a small foundation, so there's a small board. The president of the board will sometimes come to our events. We invite her. She has no background in international affairs, but she's interested. She's been supportive of our work because of our ability to work with Alan to kind of communicate to her and the rest of the board why this work is important. And so, I think Jonathan mentioned earlier about, sometimes the work needs to involve helping a program officer persuade their boss why your ideas are worth supporting. We do that a lot. And some of the times, Alan, our program officer friend, will tell us, I'm not sure I can sort of, make this work with the board. You might want to kind of reframe this or rethink this or maybe drop this and, put the money in something else as we've, done grant renewals. So he's kind of an ally of ours. And that relationship has really been of great value, and he gives us a lot of ideas. We'll sometimes run ideas for workshops by him because we know he's really interested in this, and sometimes he'll give us feedback, and sometimes we will change a program idea in a certain way because of feedback from him. Other times we won't necessarily take his ideas, and he gives us independence, but often his ideas are actually ones that improve the workshop. So I'll give a couple concrete examples. We were planning a workshop that's going to happen next month that we were calling Understanding Conflict and Escalation. This is about conflict and escalation in international affairs, and we kind of sent him a note, we're going to be doing this workshop next June, any thoughts on this? He's like, well, it's great to understand conflict and escalation, but shouldn't the goal really be to prevent and manage conflict and escalation? So why don't you, I was like, well, yeah, you're kind of right. So then I went back to the two, my role is sort of like overseeing the people who are kind of, developing the ideas for each of these workshops. So I went back to our two leads for this workshop. I said, maybe you might want to think about, tweaking the title a bit to say, managing the escalation of international conflict. And they were like, okay, that makes sense. So, in some ways this might seem like meddling, but for us it's actually quite useful and often leads to improved programming. And so I think the main things I want to underscore again without going on too long is the relationship with program officers can be really essential. Try to meet with them directly, understand their theory of change. If their theory of change really is just not aligned with yours, maybe it's not a good fit, right? I also want to mention I don't think it's good for anyone to sort of change your way of thinking about the world or your approach entirely just to sort of match up with the funder if you're not going to be happy doing the kind of work that they want to fund, right? I think you need to be doing work that you are going to want to do and that you're going to believe in. But sometimes being a little flexible is worthwhile, and it may even lead to better work than you might otherwise do. And recognize that developing a reputation with one program officer can often lead to opportunities with others. That's what happened in this example I was giving. It was because we had developed a reputation with the program officer at the Carnegie Corporation that we started a relationship with a different program officer that became very fruitful for us, and give equal attention to practitioner needs as well as to scholarly goals. One thing I meant to say, when we do these workshops, we develop the ideas of the workshops, the topics of the workshops through conversations with practitioners. So our basic model for these workshops is we have co-leads for the workshops where typically one of the co-leads is a university-based scholar, and one of the co-leads is somebody who is more of a practitioner. Often it's someone at a think tank, but they're generally more clued into the kind of practitioner world and practitioner concerns. And the whole thing starts with a conversation about what are kind of issues that practitioners would really value getting answers on, that scholars have something to say about. And that's how we kind of choose the topics, rather than choosing topics based on what's in the literature, like what's being published in the scholarly literature. Instead, it's what are the topics that practitioners would need insights on. So I'll stop there and look forward to questions and comments.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. So thank you all for being here. I'll just hand some microphones around if that's okay. Insights, questions. Let's kind of talk together about what it means to be in a university at this moment, doing the kind of work that we do, with this particular view into action-oriented funding communities. I should have said, when we started, the organizers asked that everybody sign in. Has everybody seen the sign-in sheet at this point? Please do sign in if you haven't had a chance to do so. Can I pass the mic? Yeah.
Thanks, Simon. frankly, what you just laid out to me seems almost exhausting, the amount of work that's required to do this. And as someone who is always trying to either reduce my workload or definitely share it, I'd like to know your thoughts on how can we, is there an overlap with the various offices we have at the college level and the institutional level? I'm thinking of things like Advanced AU, translational research. Jordan, you mentioned an office in SIS that helps with. What can they contribute or assist faculty in getting this process going? And could you speak a little bit to that, maybe at all of those levels from within a college, but also institutionally?
Thanks, Chris.
Just briefly, it depends on which part of which of the moving parts you're talking about. So different schools and the college have staff and leaders like Simon, who are thought partners for imagining where and how to pitch ideas. So that's at the early sort of agenda setting, upstream stage. When it comes to events, there are event staff who are, I'm sure, selective in their criteria about which events they support, but that's one source. And then if one is successful at landing a first project, and this is where we get into the potential for virtuous circles, the projects can fund staff who can handle events and a lot of the liaison and bring in applied researchers who go out and immerse themselves in the communities of practice that we want to learn from and with. So that's where the sharing of the workload comes in. The most difficult part is to get a foot in the door to be able to bring in a project manager, a mid-level sort of seasoned researcher or applied researcher who can go off and together with you do a lot of this work. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem there.
Yeah, and I would say what I've learned, I'm a social scientist sitting in a building where most people do solitary work, right? That has been our tradition and culture in the school. What I've learned from people like Jonathan and Jordan, and also from our physical science colleagues, is that having labs is just way more fun. You know, having a model where you're working in a team and you get to kind of build and manage that team. It's a different orientation, but it's served us well for particular types of project work in the school. So most of my grant applications now and relationships with funders are not written by me, or the relationships are not held by me. It's by research faculty and research staff who are funded through external money who are brought into the team. So just kind of making that switch from I want to do the work to have a particular type of scholarly impact, so I want to be part of creating the work and being a manager in that environment for broader impact has been an interesting transition.
Yeah, I would just mostly reinforce some of those points. I think it helps a lot if you're able to secure funding that supports staff, and we've been able to do that with the programming that I talked about. It wouldn't be possible otherwise. But I think many of the units across the campus have great research offices. We do in SIS, and they have been tremendously helpful with getting a lot of work off the ground. And course releases are, I think, tremendously valuable. So I have mostly used the funding that has come to me as part of this work for course releases. It wouldn't be possible for me to do it without that.
Please.
Yeah, so thank you so much. This was really insightful, and I'm a early career faculty as well, so especially seeing what the future could hold. But in that respect, you all talked about your strong relationships with program officers. I mean, you even said that they're allies, right? And you have these labs and these program staff as well. And so as an early career researcher who's trying to apply for, not necessarily what you all are doing, I'm in criminal justice, but for opportunities where other applicants have this strong research infrastructure and many years behind them, what do you recommend for, and I don't like the language I'm going to use, but like how we compete with them? How we can show that we are credible people that can do this work when we don't necessarily have the seniority that our fellow applicants have?
Well, I would start just by saying there are a lot of funders who want to fund emerging scholars. They don't want to generally fund the same people over and over again. That isn't necessarily true of all funders. I mean, funders are all different, but I think generally funders are excited when they come across or get connected with somebody new who's doing great work, cutting edge, next generation, but they don't necessarily come across those people without someone or something facilitating that. So it's just sort of about getting on their radar screen. But I think a lot of people in the funding community are very excited when they encounter an emerging person who they don't already know.
Yeah, I would just add that it's probably relevant to be seen by potential gatekeepers more as allies than competitors. So how do you get a foot in the door with them so you get invited to their meetings so you can meet their funders if their funders go to their meetings? As well as just the whole issue of gaining standing in the field in the eyes of practitioners, which can be a matter of op-eds and policy briefs and the usual sort of repertoire of ways of communicating that involve trying to put yourself in the shoes of your target audiences. So the visibility, the legibility of your own work, but also this question of access. How do you recruit influential mentors who may actually be gatekeepers to the applied funders?
Other insights, questions?
Thank you, and thank you very much for being here this morning. Sort of a similar question to pick up on Dr. St. Louis's point on especially the early career side of how maybe on the other side of the coin we communicate applied and practitioner-focused work to the sort of gatekeepers on the scholarly and academic side, and sort of understanding that we need to both like build credibility as scholars as we're doing more outward-facing work, and how to maybe communicate that to the people who end up hiring you, promoting you, and allowing you to stay in an academic career.
I think that's there's not a sort of simple answer to that. I'll offer a few thoughts. One is that some of this work can be framed very effectively as extensions of your research, as further impact of your research. And many of the tenure and promotion guidelines now across the university, and at I think a growing number of other universities, include impact of research beyond standard academic metrics as a potential part of one's research impact. And so here in SIS, when I came up for tenure, I included work I did that was beyond traditional academic work, that was based on my academic work but was reaching broader audiences as part of the impact of my research. And so I think you can do that when you're framing this work. The other thing I would say is, there are trade-offs. Of course, everyone's time is limited, right? And fundamentally, you as especially early career scholar, you want to be making sure that you're prioritizing your kind of traditional academic work, the academic publications in good journals and the like. But some of this action-oriented research or practitioner engagement can really fuel your own research down the line too. There's sort of long-term benefits. So I mean, some of this work I've done has informed my subsequent research agenda and been generative of scholarly publications, as well as practitioner-oriented publications. And actually now one of my research streams as a scholar is about work to connect research and practice. I mean, I've now published a number of peer-reviewed articles that are about how scholars, engage with practitioners and those kinds of topics. So it's added something to my own research agenda.
Yeah, just fortunately, we are at a university that really does respect practitioner impact and gaining standing, standing for our work. That said, I would be very cautious about investing in this line of work in 2 or 3 years before coming up for tenure, because of this, the virtuous circle takes a while, and there are a lot of false starts. There's a lot of trial and error. if you start investing heavily in this path in your fourth year, the chances of having a product that will count in time for tenure are kind of slim. So I would actually hold off until immediately, after putting in your tenure packet, or in the early years if you've got a bunch of stuff in the pipeline, and that will give enough time for this kind of investment to mature and produce some kind of product. But in terms of the way you spend the 2 or 3 years before your tenure packet is due, this is all extra, to be quite frank.
Yeah, and that said, relationships take time to build, and so there's no reason to avoid the meeting downtown or the invitation to a workshop where you get to kind of start building these connections at any stage. Yeah. Other questions, insights?
Hello, thank you very much for your presentations. I thought it might be useful to follow up on that question. I served as a program officer for the National Science Foundation, one of their rotating positions, 4 years ago, 5 years ago probably. And at the National Science Foundation proposals, at least in the directorate that I was associated with, which is biological sciences, there is a necessity of what they refer to as broader impacts. And so, as far as we were concerned, the program officers, we still funded the science, but you were not getting an NSF grant without substantive and sustained efforts when it came to the broader impacts of whatever the work we're doing. I don't know if this goes across in other areas. I mean, I don't even know what social and behavioral economics is if it's going to be alive next year. But that's one way in which you can definitely sell it.
Thank you. I have a question which is probably a bit niche, but I'm wondering if you're both a practitioner and a scholar, how would you frame that in kind of building those relationships?
I would call yourself a scholar practitioner. I mean, just in terms of labels, perhaps. I mean, I'm not necessarily you, Pauline, but I mean, just in general, right? I think we don't have to think of these as binary categories. And actually, it's something that's come out in the work that I've done that I was talking about. Our whole framing is we're bringing together scholars and practitioners. The reality is there are a lot of people who are at the intersection between scholarship and practice. For instance, we engage a lot with many folks who are at think tanks, and many of those people, they have PhDs. They understand research, but they're doing more practitioner, oriented work, and so labeling them as scholar or practitioner is a little bit, arbitrary. And as Jonathan mentioned, there are people who are, fully in policy institutions or, practitioner institutions like government or nonprofits, who themselves have what I would call a scholarly bent. They think in conceptual terms. They're happy to engage in conceptual conversations. Those are the people you really want to have in these rooms. I mean, they're not the only ones, but we see that in our workshops where there are people who come and they work at a government agency, but they are like happy to really kind of dive in with conceptual conversations, and they like that kind of more intellectual exchange. So. I'm not sure if that totally answers your question, but that's one way that I think about this.
Yeah, I've come in time to a very kind of a very fluid relationship with my own professional identity, and with my own scholarly or practitioner agendas. Right. So studying my own kind of academic work, I had an interest in emerging tech and environmental outcomes. That's what I was working on. And then started working on things like biotechnology, which led to a relationship with the White House during the Obama years on the Feed the Future program. And I was like, well, that's interesting work. I got to kind of spend a bit of time kind of working on something very kind of pragmatic and practical out of my scholarly orientation. And then I wrote an article on, solar radiation management, reflecting sunlight back into space as a way to ameliorate climate risk. And it was stupid and weird, and it just made no sense, and I was kind of wildly kind of angry at this idea. And now I've been working on it for like 20 years. It's just like, you know, I thought it would be a one and done, and now my kind of scholarly practitioner identity has been shaped through this one engagement that kind of met a policy need at that moment, and it's led to a whole bunch of other spin-offs, right? So, you know, I think part of what I've learned from Jonathan and part of what we kind of reflected on in this memo is just being open. Not being kind of rigid and locked into a particular understanding of what your contribution might be and where that path might take you. And this is something that our colleague Sharon Weiner kind of contributed to the memo. Being willing to frame the same thing in multiple different ways given audience, right? Different funders will want to see different things in the work that you do. And you have to be nimble enough to follow a conversation and follow a relationship into a set of funding and other relationships that advance the interesting work that you want to do that also meets the needs of the communities that you're working with.
Thank you for this informative discussion. I'm part of an interdisciplinary team of researchers here at AU doing a hate speech project called Unmasking Anti-Semitism. We're 0 for 2 at NSF, and we are currently, you know, we have been applying to the SBE, Social Behavioral and Economic Directorate, and if you've been reading the news on what's been happening, my friend over there knows, we're about to get catapulted into the foundation funding world. And so starting those relationships is indeed daunting. But my general question to you is, how has what has been happening at the federal government level with government funding changing what's been happening with the foundation funding world, if you know or have any insights into that?
My sense is that the foundations generally are doing everything possible to avoid being seen as the plan B for those who used to get federal money, and so there's a combination of deer in the headlights and run the other direction, right? So, and I would say, I mean, though NSF has this impact criteria, you have to convince the academic experts to get to the point where they will start looking at the impact criteria, in contrast to private foundations who are going to be looking at impact first. And then they'll be interested in rigor, but maybe not the same kind of understanding of rigor and not getting as involved in what they would consider to be, you know, minor methodological points that would could devastate your viability in a purely scientific assessment and so forth. So the point of departure of the foundation reviewers is quite different. In terms of how to get a foot in, you know, I come back to the detective work. I come back to find out what are they doing. Treat the program officers as experts and sources of information and potential colleagues and counterparts in a shared agenda, but long before you think about asking them for money. And that they will appreciate having their expertise respected, you know, asking them about the landscape of the field and how is it changing? How do they see the cutting edge issues 2 years ahead? And so, you know, essentially treating them as colleagues rather than a purely instrumental approach, I think is a very important way to get at. And in terms of nimbleness, I would say it's really helpful to have 2 or 3 different concept notes in your back pocket at any time. I'm talking about, you know, 2, 3, 5 pagers max, with different frames for different possible audiences. It's an extremely useful sort of intellectual and analytical exercise to imagine how to align how to, you know, target our ideas and goals to specific audiences. It is work, but it's not as much work as actually doing the research. But it also begins to get you well into the search for the elusive zone of overlap that we talked about. And it's with these kinds of private foundations that don't operate based on open calls for research per se, it's the concept note that will land the grant, not the proposal. They will only invite the proposal if they've already bought into the concept note. But they can express a willingness, or you can ask after you've met them if they'll read the concept note and comment on a draft. And because it's just a concept note, they're not committing to anything in particular. And it's their commitment to you that comes when they invite you to actually submit the proposal. The decision has already been made.
The foundation landscape, of course, is in turmoil in part because of the changes in the federal funding landscape. And so relationships that we had built through time have just been destroyed from my own group as program officers that had been pushed out by organizations that now have different priorities, right? And so one entry point for conversations now with program officers is, what are you making of the mess? Right? How are you making sense of what's going on? Because we're kind of sharing something around which we need to rebuild, right? So agenda setting work right now is critically important because everybody's scrambling. Everybody's trying to make sense of the world. We have a few minutes for additional questions and insights. Please.
Thank you. I come from the commercial side of things, and I'm just now getting into the academic, and I know this is kind of on the other end of seeking funding, but it's pretty clear cut what's expected from me on the commercial side, but on the academic side, getting research, can you talk a little bit about, and it's broad, but what is expected of you from your research? Are you giving presentations? Are you using this for, I know it's all different for who you're talking to, but I'm kind of interested in what you're expected of as a researcher and a team, as opposed to make money for investors. So curious on that front.
Yeah, probably something more than given the research funding landscape we're talking about here, probably something other than just an academic article, right, as a starting point. And this is not meant to be disparaging, it's not meant to take anything away from the work that we're all kind of spending most of our time doing. But when we're having these conversations with program officers, often some of the to and fro, the dance is, what do you need from us as researchers through your own theory of change and the change you want to see in the world? Well, we're going to spin off these academic articles. They're going to change the kind of research that the research field is doing in these particular ways. That's important for what the foundations see as necessary. And in addition, there might be an agenda setting workshop. There might be op-eds. There might be policy white papers. There might be kind of various other work products that are directly related to and spin out of the research-oriented work that we're doing, but wouldn't be typically things that we as academics on the tenure line would spend our time on, right? And finding ways to kind of treat that as a package of outcomes in pursuit of a particular set of goals, for me, is a lot of the dance that we end up doing with funders. Does that resonate?
Yeah, I would just add, imagine you have a 2-year research project, which is better than a 1-year research project. The chances that you'll have a scholarly journal article accepted for publication at the end of the 2 years when you're doing your final report are slim. There's a lot of other things you're doing with your life unless you got a boatload of course releases early on in that 2-year period. So in terms of, and we actually avoid the term deliverables, but it's used, what are some intermediate products that will come out early in the second year of the 2-year period so that the funder will see something tangible, you'll get some possible resonance or uptake in your community of practice, while the funder is deciding whether or not to pencil you in for a renewal, which happens long before the grant actually ends. So a report on a practitioner learning event, it's not easy to make them interesting to those who were not in the room. It's not easy to crystallize the key takeaways for the broader field. To somewhere between, a bunch of bullet points and a boring transcript, this is a craft in itself to come up with a learning exchange report that has legs. So think about intermediate products that will come out in a well-timed moment.
Same thoughts mostly.
Good catch.
Well caught.
Sorry. Yeah, no, mostly similar thoughts. I think whenever you're organizing an event or a convening where scholars and practitioners are interacting it's an opportunity to write something based on that event. We do that after ours, and it's similar to what Jonathan's describing. These are kind of, generally reports, following the event. But sometimes those are also opportunities that we take advantage of, or other participants take advantage of, to write something that's kind of building off of off of these conversations, and that can be an article in a journal, a policy-oriented journal, or a sort of public-facing article. And we actually will often invite to our workshops an editor from what we call a policy journal, an outlet that kind of publishes work at the intersection of research and policy in the field of international affairs. So, for instance, there's a journal called Washington Quarterly, which people, outside of the international affairs field probably wouldn't know, but it's a journal that publishes kind of policy-oriented articles on international affairs. We know the editor of this journal well, and he has come to some of these workshops, and then, based on the workshop, invited participants to sort of write an article for the journal, and this counts as a serious publication for that scholar.
And the funder.
Yes, and the funder. Yep.
Just noticing the time. We are at time. Thank you all very much for being part of the conversation. Jonathan and I would very much welcome feedback on the memo that you have. So if there are reflections that you can feed back to us, if you have a few minutes just to kind of put your responses into an email, that would be incredibly valuable. And here to continue the conversation if that's ever of interest. Okay, so the next sessions apparently start at 11, so we have a little break now between sessions. Thank you.